Hey ladies and gentlemen, thanks for trying science. Today we're going to be talking about Punnett squares, reviewing genetics, the whole thing. So make sure you have your packet. Don't forget you have homework, check Schoology. There's a quiz coming up. Be prepared, open notes hopefully for you. Okay, let's take a look at a question that we could ask. Are your genes the only factor that determines your traits? In other words, are you just a product of your genes, or is there something else? Like if you were born in a different country, would you have different tastes and like different foods, have different hobbies? Probably, right? Your environment influences your genes in strange ways that we're just learning about. In fact, some genes can be turned on or off by certain environmental factors. Some of them could actually be bad, like cigarette smoke, and maybe some could be positive. So it's a kind of interesting thing to think about how your genes and your environment work together. All right, guys, today we're going to review, like I said, Punnett squares first, because there's so much going on with those. Then we'll talk about some genetic disorders and different things and ways to kind of manage that. So let's go look at page 9 of our packet called Pass It On, which is part of your homework. Make sure you do your homework and then go back to Schoology after doing it on the paper copy first. So on page 9, there is a problem that they ask about Punnett squares. I'm going to go to the board because it's just easier to write there. So I'll see you in just a second. Okay, here we are on page 9, and it's saying, question 1, use a Punnett square to show all the possible genotypes for the offspring of a father with genotype capital D, capital D. So I'm going to write that down here. That's pure dominant. And a mother with a genotype capital D, little d, which is hybrid or heterozygous. And the trait is dimples. We're using capital D for the dominant dimples trait and lowercase d for the recessive. Okay, so father's genes usually go on top of the Punnett square. So we've got the father genotype, the mother's genotype like this. So the hardest part sometimes is setting up the Punnett squares. When you get to questions 3 or 4, it's going to be a little more vague. They're going to have you make inferences, but you can figure it out. You just have to maybe read it a couple times. Now we're going to just bring the father's possible genes down and then over to fill in the boxes. And this is just completing this probability. And we're going to bring this over and over here and here. Okay? So that's just the basics of filling that out. Now we're going to talk about how we can figure out what's going on. These are the offspring possibilities. Here are our possible genotypes. Always looks similar. Pure dominant, hybrid, pure recessive. Those are the possibilities. But let's look at this example and see what we actually have. How many pure dominants? We have 2 out of 4, which is 50%. Hybrids, we have 2 out of 4. That's also 50%. And no pure recessive. So that's no chance. With this mother and father, there's no chance of having someone with that genotype. All right, let's look at the phenotypes. Now the problem said that this trait is dimples. So in this case, the phenotype is what you actually see in the person's physical traits. So we're either going to have dimples or no dimples. And I can figure that out because I know that this is a 1 gene trait. If you have the dominant gene, you have the trait. So I know there's 1, 2, 3, 4 children who are getting one of the dominant genes. So that means it's a 100% chance everyone's getting dimples. No chance, no probability at all of them not having dimples. So now you can answer questions about, well, what's the chance of someone having dimples in this family? 100%, all of them could have dimples or will have dimples. All right, why don't you try number 2 and pause this, and then we'll do one more, okay? And when you're ready, come back and let's check your answers. Okay, number 2 is about 2 types of dogs. One dog homozygous for brown, the other homozygous for white. Brown is dominant. So homozygous means both the same. So one's brown, one's white. So we'll just put these genes here and these genes here. Mathematically, it wouldn't matter where you put those. Just keep them organized. Then we fill in our Punnett Square. We bring the letters down and over. This is all the possibilities of all the offspring. Here's what could happen. And in this case, all of the offspring are hybrid. So there's no chance of these genetic possibilities. The phenotypes, we're either going to have the trait brown or not brown, which is white in the problem. So since every one of these has one dominant gene, we have 100% compared to 0%. And that's how you do the Punnett squares. Figuring out the parent's genotype and then moving on from there, you can make some really good predictions about the future. But genetics is more than just predicting the future. You could also project into the past, and that's what we're going to look at next. A pedigree chart or genealogy is a chart that visualizes or traces the genetic traits back through several generations. Okay, the way this works is the symbols here represent people, and the Roman numerals, or where it says generation 1, 2, and 3, represents the generations. So yours in your notes on page 10 looks slightly different, but you also have the similar setup. So you have your first generation on the top, second, and third. So if this is you, then this is your parents, this is your grandparents' generation. All of the squares are male. All of the circles are female. When there's a line between a male and a female linking them, then that means they're married and had offspring, which we can show here. They had one girl and one boy. This family here had two girls and two boys. Okay? These two got married and had a boy and a girl. Now, being shaded in fully means that you have the trait and you have someone in your first generation and in your third generation. So label a shaded box the trait. And if you have half shaded, you have carriers. So I have carriers here. So let's say this is a recessive type of a trait. So the genotypes for my carriers would be capital G, lowercase g. And if my trait, it's recessive, 2 little g's. Okay, so this is a way to look back. Where did this person get their trait? You always get your genes from your parents, not from your grandparents directly, but through your parents' parents, a trait could get traced down. So this recessive gene from here to here, along with this trait, boom. Now it shows up as fully recessive, okay? So these recessive traits can get passed on and on and on. Those are pedigrees. They're useful because sometimes we want to track a genetic disorder. Maybe instead of this being just blue eyes, maybe it's a damaged gene that's getting passed on, and that can happen. So on the back you have genetic disorders. Diseases caused by damaged or missing genes that could be passed down to offspring or inherited. Cystic fibrosis, or CF for short, is the most common genetic disease. Pause if you need to. Here's how cystic fibrosis, or recessive genetic disorders, could get passed on. Here are two parents, both unaffected but carriers. So they used R. So we have capital R, little r, capital R, little r. They have the capital, so they're completely normal. That's the healthy gene that's dominant that takes over. So remember, we do Punnett squares. We have the 4 possibilities. There's one possibility, completely healthy and carrier, healthy and carrier. So this person looks healthy on the phenotype, but they are carrying the recessive gene. And if these 2 recessive genes result in this person having the actual disease, they don't have a healthy version of the gene. So what is CF? Let's check it out.
11,000 in the UK. And in the UK, each week, 2 people die from CF and 5 more babies are born with it. Which probably means a lot of you are watching this in search of answers to that big question. So, let's get started. Cystic fibrosis is about genetics. You can't catch it. But if both your parents have the CF gene, there's a 1 in 4 chance you'll be born with the condition. About 1 in 25 people carry the gene, and most don't even know it. And I should say at the start, there's currently no getting rid of it. All sounds a bit gloomy, right? But whilst there's no cure, a lovely life is still possible. Just look at me. You see, I have CF, so I think I'm a good person to tell you a little bit more about it. Cystic fibrosis is caused by a faulty gene that disrupts the movement of salt and water in the body's cells, making the mucus in people with CF thicker and stickier. This sticky mucus causes problems, mainly in the lungs and digestive system, but also affects other parts of the body too. It's not nice. The small airways in the lungs can get clogged up with this mucus, causing infections and, over time, damage to the lungs. So, what does all that mean for everyday life? Well, here are some of the symptoms. Frequent chest infections, severe or prolonged coughs, wheezing or shortness of breath, abnormal bowel movements, difficulty gaining weight, and for most men, infertility. There's also the issue of never being able to meet up with anyone else with CF. Basically, we could make each other unwell because of the bugs and infections that get transmitted between people with the condition. For better or worse, CF is a part of me. It may be an unhealthy relationship, but there are a lot of daily treatments to tackle cystic fibrosis effectively, which can make our union that bit more harmonious. A whole host of antibiotics to fight infections in my lungs. They're not all that colourful, but you get the idea. Physiotherapy to help shift the mucus that builds up around my organs. Enzyme capsules to take with food. They're really not that hard to swallow. And talking of food, we need a special high-fat diet to make sure our bodies get all the nutrients that it needs.
So CF is the most common genetic disease. Okay, on the back there you've got a place to write mutations. It's pretty long, so maybe you should pause. Mutations are changes in DNA code sequence. Remember, our DNA is A's, T's, C's, and G's in a code. Well, sometimes that could be mixed up, changed around, and it could lead to a new trait sometimes. Some mutations are harmful, like cancer. Some mutations are helpful, like maybe being able to blend in more with your environment. And some are neutral, meaning they make no change. If mutations occur in reproductive cells, then a new trait can be passed on. So a mutation in your skin cells not going to be passed on to your children because that's your skin. You don't donate your skin cells when you make new children. Reproductive cells, however, are combined to make new people. And if there's a DNA change there, that's going to be what the new person gets. And that's something that might happen, as you go through the process of evolution or something. Are there ways to treat genetic diseases and disorders? Yes. There's a new idea called gene therapy. This is how we treat genetic disorders by replacing the damaged or missing gene with a healthy version. So if you've got a missing gene, in the case of CF, it's a gene that talks about the movement of water and salt through the cell membrane. If that protein's missing, then we could replace it. And people would get completely better instantly. They would have the protein they need. Their cells would work completely normally. They wouldn't have the mucus issues or any of it. It would just go away. The problem is, how do you get that gene into all the trillions of cells of someone who's already a full-grown person? Well, that is tricky. But there is one thing in nature that does infect cells and injects DNA, and that's a virus. So a virus will inject its DNA into your cell, and your cell will start making viruses or doing whatever that DNA says to do. What if we take out the harmful virus DNA and then put in the healthy gene that you need? And that might work, and it does work. Sometimes not fully forever, but it's an idea. And getting that to stick, in other words, getting that to stay and be part of you, if that works, you're completely cured. So let's take a look at some genetic therapy.
I'm Trace. Gene therapy sounds like a nice, easy treatment, right? It's therapy. In some ways it is, on the macro level, but in your cells, it's a little bit invasive. In gene therapy, doctors are basically hacking the DNA of a living human. Using genetically engineered retroviruses called vectors, scientists infect human cells. The retrovirus can be programmed to carry a gene or a little bit of DNA that will overwrite the messed up mutation and make it work properly. It was first tried on a young girl in 1990, and despite some early failures, it has the potential to revolutionize treatment of genetic disorders. The journal Science describes one of the recent successes that gene therapists say was really exciting. A few children were born with metachromatic leukodystrophy, which causes a defective immune system and some brain disorders, and kids who have it usually don't live past the age of 5. Bone marrow contains stem cells. The cells normally produce red blood cells, but they can be reprogrammed using gene therapy. It's a little risky, but it can work. Taking bone marrow from these kids, doctors were able to infect the cells with a retrovirus and replace the stem cell's mutated gene with a repaired gene. Then they re-injected that back into the patient, and the fixed cells multiplied, and as of the time we filmed this, the patients are all in good condition and are heading to kindergarten at the time that others with that disease can't even speak. There may be future side effects, but they seem pretty happy with the result at the moment. I mean, I would be. Science just helped some kids. Woo! It's not just useful in children. Scientists have also used gene therapy on dogs to cure them of type 1 diabetes, with 2 of their doggy patients still alive years later. The treatment involved injecting 2 things into dogs' muscles, one gene to sense glucose and an enzyme to dictate glucose absorption. Scientists don't have to target our DNA. They can also use gene therapy to target the DNA of cancer cells. It's like they gave cancer cancer. You've seen this before if you've been following D News. A protein called CD47 is like a passport that tells your immune system not to attack a cell. Normally, cancer produces a ton of CD47. Using gene therapy on the cancer, scientists turned off that cell production and let the immune system blow it out of the sky like a decloaked Klingon bird of prey. Gene therapy is still in its infancy, but the promise of future cures for everything from cancer to genetic disorders is pretty incredible.
Okay, last up for today. Put down the definition for sex-linked or gender-linked disorder. This is when the unhealthy gene is found on the X chromosome. And some common examples are colorblindness and hemophilia. Hemophilia is when your blood doesn't clot correctly and a small cut keeps bleeding and never clots. So that's a serious thing. And colorblindness can be tested for pretty easily. Here's a test for colorblindness. There are 2 shapes inside of this big square here. Do you see the yellow circle? Great. Most people can. But how about the pinkish square? It's here. If you're unable to distinguish either of these, you might have color blindness, which means that you have a gene that's either missing or damaged on your X chromosome. So let's talk about that. Everybody has X chromosomes. Boys, however, also have a Y chromosome. So if you're a boy, your genotype is XY. We're going to put that at the top of our chart. If you're a girl, you have 2 X's, so we'll put them here, XX. Now we're going to add the healthy or diseased form of the gene on the X, because it's only found on the X chromosome. X chromosomes contain genes that make you a girl, but also a human, and things like being able to see color or clot blood are also found on the X chromosome. The Y chromosome doesn't give you anything except the male traits. So, we have a male, healthy, and we have a female with 1 healthy form of the gene and 1 where something's missing. So we'll put lowercase h. Let's say it's unhealthy. The healthy gene is dominant. Let me go to the board and show you what I mean. Okay, we're going to fill in our square like we always do. So, X, in this case, capital H. Let's bring that so you can read it. There we go. X, capital H. So that was from Dad. We just brought that down. The Y comes down here. Mom's genes go over, remember? So we have an X with the capital H just to show that it's a healthy version. X with the capital H here. Now this gene gets brought over, so that's an X with the unhealthy version of the X chromosome. Same here. All right, so what does that end up with? What are our children? We have a girl with 2 healthy forms of the X, so perfectly healthy, normal. We have another girl here. The healthy form is dominant and it takes over. So this person has all of the right genes they need. They're totally healthy in their phenotype. They just have this. They're carriers of this situation. The first boy up here, XY's boy, has the healthy X chromosome. Everything's fine and totally normal. This boy, however, got the unhealthy form. So colorblindness is more common in boys than girls because boys only have 1 X chromosome. Girls always have 2. So in the case of this person, although they have this lowercase h, they also have the dominant, which is kind of like a backup. So this person's healthy. This boy has, let's say, colorblindness and can't see orange squares in the green circle, right? So that's how that could get passed on. That's a sex-linked thing because it's on the genes that determine boy or girl. And it's kind of fun to see that it's always going to be a 50-50 chance of having a boy or a girl. Interesting. All right, guys. So that's our genetic pedigrees, a little bit about genetic diseases, disorders, and even some genetic therapy. Thanks for joining us and trying science. Make sure you go and look in your packet and do the things that are there. Get ready for a quiz with open notes. And hey, I know it's a lot, so go back and rewatch these or other online lessons if you need to. And thanks for trying science. See you on the next one. Bye for now.